Hi, welcome to Port 43 on the Lackawanna Cutoff, where we're going to be talking about the 100th anniversary of the Rockport Wreck, which took place on June 16th, 1925. Hi, I'm Chuck Walsh, and I'm here with Mike Helbing, and we're going to be describing what happens on that actually morning or middle of the night occurrence on the Lackawanna Railroad, which we're here at Rockport, New Jersey, in Mansfield Township at what is today known as Hazen Road, or the Hazen Road crossing of the line. Back in the day, it was known as the Mansfield Township-Rockport Highway. So, first of all, what's the relevance to the cutoff? And this wreck, how does this happen, and what are the details behind it? Well, the wreck is actually of a special train which is being run from Chicago to Hoboken for a group of 182 German folks who were living in the Chicago area. They board the train that will wreck here on a Sunday night at 6 p.m. It'll actually wreck Tuesday morning at 3:25 here, but they board at 6 p.m. on Sunday night. The train goes and stops in Buffalo, and it may actually have gone to Niagara Falls back in the day if they could have done that. But anyway, 6 p.m. on Monday night, that train heads over the Lackawanna, heads in this direction. Now, the train is comprised of, at that point, the 1104, which is the locomotive, a tender, 2 coaches, a Pullman diner, and then 4 Pullman coaches. And this has been chartered by Leopold Newman, who's at that point had done this type of thing for many years. The idea was that these 182 people are going to be meeting up with a whole bunch of other folks in Hoboken and boarding the Republic, the SS Republic, for Germany. And they're going to be, this is June, they're going to be there and probably not returning until sometime in early September, the way I understand it. So it's basically a whole summer vacation, if you will. Now these folks, some of them middle class, but some of these folks are carrying lots of money because they're going to be paying cash when they're over there. Some stories of some carrying several $1,000s in U.S. currency. So in any case, the train is in Buffalo, New York. It leaves at 6 p.m. and heads east, and will stop in Scranton, Pennsylvania, roughly around midnight. And at that point, the engineer, Fred Loomis, is informed that the train will not be crossing over the cutoff, which you would expect it would. It would be a lot faster and more direct. The thing is that the train, and apparently this is some kind of I don't know if you would call it a practice, but in any case, they've decided, because of freight traffic on the cutoff and because the train's way ahead of schedule, the departure time out of Hoboken for the ship is, I believe, is I think it's 10 o'clock or sometime in the late morning. As a result, this train, there's no real rush to get it to Hoboken, so they reroute it, instead of over the cutoff, over the old road.
And it's clearly not because of scenery, because at that time of night they're going to be mostly asleep and not going to see any of it anyway.
Right. By the time they're in the Poconos, it's already past midnight, so the Poconos is all in the dark. So at Slateford Junction, they switch onto the old road and head in this direction, so to speak, because it's a circuitous route that the old road goes, whereas the cutoff was a much shorter route, 11 miles shorter than the route that this would go over between the Port Morris and Slateford. Anyway, the train will go through Washington, New Jersey, headed in this direction, which is about 5 miles from here. The time, 3:18. Supposedly at high speed, but that's debatable because the speed limit through Washington, and there's a yard and so forth, is 30 miles an hour. 3:25, it reaches here and will derail. Now the question, why does it derail? Well, the grade crossing here looked quite a bit different than it does today. first of all, there were 2 tracks, but also this roadway, which is today Hazen Road, but back in the day was the highway, the Mansfield Township-Rockport Highway, is a dirt road with gravel and sand and rock.
And had a steeper grade as well.
As you can see
in the Barry images, you could see it going up a much steeper grade on the south side.
So maybe they've removed some of that material.
It's clearly been cut down, yes.
Okay, so because they're saying it's like 9% grade, and that doesn't, I don't know if it's
it was much steeper, we can see from Barry's images.
So what happens is there's thunderstorms which are reported even as far west as Binghamton, Scranton, through Washington. They said it wasn't raining at the time when the train came through. But they're talking about a cloud burst or something, very heavy rain through here, which washes a bunch of debris into the flangeways on the grade crossing up 4 to 6 inches. The front trucks of the 1104 locomotive, steam locomotive, hit that debris, and it derails the front trucks. They're 2 wheels up front, actually 4 wheels up on front. It's a 462 Pacific. And what happens is immediately that front wheel, which should be on this track, is now here. And the right wheel is over here. So for 198 feet, the front wheels of the locomotive are going to be bumping along the ties at anywhere between 50 and 70 miles an hour. We can talk about that dispute because there's disagreement about how fast that particular train was going. Nevertheless, let's assume for the moment that it was maybe doing 60 miles an hour. We'll basically split the difference. It'll travel 198 feet until, and this is really the worst case scenario, until it hits a trailing switch crossover, which is basically, if you know from your train sets or your line L or whatever, there are 2 types of switches. There are leading point switches where if you're going in this direction, you can go directly onto the next track, wherever you're going. A trailing point switch, however, is just the opposite. You would have to go past the point of where the switch is and then back into it. Now, why is that important here? Well, the problem is this trailing point switch has a rail across the ties hooking into the track here.
So it hit it like you're saying is from this angle, it hit it like this, and in effect, it was a bumper.
Pretty much.
The train hit a bumper that then caused this accordion reaction with the rest of the railroad.
Yeah, exactly. And what happens is that with it hitting that, and we can go over there and take a look where I've actually drawn it out. The locomotive, because he's doing 60, 70 miles an hour, isn't going to just stop right there, but it's dragging along the ties on its side. Probably at this point, the engineer and firemen are killed, I'm suspecting, because of this, the flipping
as you
over.
said, there was reports that they even got impaled on some of the gears and levers in the front of the.
It was pretty bad. Yeah, and
so they hit with some major force.
Yes, exactly, and then it comes to rest. The front of the locomotive, where the trucks that have been bounding over the ties come to rest 450 feet from the point at the grade crossing. So there's rapid deceleration, but it gets worse. That would be bad enough. What happens is that the coach that is behind, I think it's the Sirocco, I believe it is, the Sirocco.
The one they called the death car?
The death car. That now goes up and over, I guess, onto the locomotive, rips off steam fittings, and breaks windows and so forth. And now you have superheated steam being shot up into this car. It's pitch black. The lights go out on the train.
Half the people were probably asleep.
Yeah, right. It's right in the middle of the night. They mostly, probably everyone's asleep in their night clothes. Probably they could be in a coach, or we don't know, but many were. Then Now, superheated steam, you think of steam like if you have boiled water, steam coming out of a pot, if you touch it, that really hurts. I mean, you could get burned just from that. But that's at 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius at basically sea level. Superheated steam is a totally different animal. The 1104 has a steam pressure of 200 pounds per square inch. So the temperature of the steam that's being shot up into the death car is approximately 390 degrees Fahrenheit or 200 degrees Celsius.
And these victims basically melted under that.
It's horrific. And it's surprising that anyone actually survived. We don't know, the accounting of who was where, but clearly the people who were in that car probably didn't stand a chance. You're right.
Yeah.
Because once you get, and then we're talking 100 years ago. We're not even talking about today, where burns, once you get above like 40% of your body surface burned, your chances of surviving drop precipitously. You just can't imagine that these people might have been burned over 100% of their body for all intents and purposes. So it's horrible. But the thing is that with scalding from steam, there were people who died because of the impact. I'll tell a story about a blonde-haired girl in a moment, but most of the people survived the wreck. They died because of the scalding, and that's I'd say a terrible way to go. It's just horrific. And some of the people will die here. Some of the people will die over the next couple of days. They'll have rescue trains. They'll bring the people to Hackettstown, Dover, Morristown, and then in this direction, I think Washington, Easton, for example, Phillipsburg. They spread it out because you're talking not just 50 people will die, 45 who are passengers, 5 from the crew, but there are dozens and dozens of people who are injured and who will survive but need to be treated, of course. But you have reports of people actually, and one in particular, a man who offers, I'm talking about the money that they're carrying around. He has this big wad of bills, and he's offering anybody who will kill him, he'll give them the wad of bills. I mean, it's. And then there's the story of the blonde-haired girl. I'm not sure who saw it. It might have been a nurse, the story goes. And it's off to the side. Remember, the locomotive is off to the side here. And the cars are kind of strewn about, and a few of the cars are actually remain on the rails, and they'll be used as a rescue train, and we'll go that way to be able to get them to hospitals in that direction, Easton and Phillipsburg and Washington. The nurse comes out, and I think it's on this side of the railroad. She sees a blonde-haired girl, but she says, "Oh, she looks very peaceful." She goes over to see what's the story is, and she realizes, with the long blonde hair, that's all there is. She's been decapitated, and it's a girl who must have been in one of the coaches, and we don't know what happened. You have to figure probably something with the going through the window or something, because she was thrown clear of the train. And so forth. The stories are, none of them are good, but you have to realize that the state of medical science at that point is pretty much primitive. They're talking about bringing olive oil and lard to put on. I can't imagine that this is like, oh my gosh, what would that do? To try to somehow treat these people. Morphine, of course, because it's extremely painful. These people are in agony. And so this train is here. Now, it is dark. It will remain dark probably until about 5 a.m. and when the lights are. Now, the thing is, there will be possibly 2 different sources of light, but they're not what you would expect. In that direction, there's a huge fire that's taking place in Hackettstown in a lumber yard. And they didn't call them first responders in those days, but the emergency people are there, and I would imagine, some of them are going to be contacted. Somebody runs over and realizes, hey, we got something even worse that's on the other side of town over here. The other thing is, when the locomotive derails and comes to a stop, it actually starts its own fire, and they have to put that out. So they have to stop what they're doing, trying to help these people, to treat them as best they possibly can, at least get them out of the cars. But first they have to put the fire out, which is somewhere off, I think, on the right-hand side. It probably lit the trees or stuff. I don't know at that time what there was here, because it probably looked.
Well, there was a lot less vegetation too, and that we know that the fields were in a very young growth at the time, so it wasn't like it was going to spread too far. Unfortunately, the historic images don't really show that, and in a black and white, it's hard to tell what we're looking at when it comes to char too.
Yes, and much of the photograph, at least the official photographs from the Lackawanna, Mr. Barry, he doesn't get here until sometime in the afternoon. So this has been cleared off. So when you see the photos, nothing looks out of the ordinary. But once again, when they first got here and they started looking, they realized there's about this much dirt that was on, or debris that was in the flangeways. In other words, where the flange for the wheels would be, and that caused a derailment.
And it shows in some of the historic William B. Barry Jr. images that there is a train car that's moved up onto a hillside. We were questioning whether or not that was a siding. No, it was not. It appears that it was just moved out of the way of the track to prevent any other traffic from having to slow down coming through here. And the pictures clearly show the connection and the frog you mentioned that was there.
Right, and unfortunately, Mr. Barry doesn't get here until sometime apparently in the afternoon. So there are photos from the New York Times, for example, which show pretty much the scene as it was when it first happened. You have the engineer, Fred Loomis, the fireman. His last name is Hayne, but it's not spelled like you would think Hayne would be spelled. It's unusual spelling.
H-A-Y or something?
Yeah, but it's an M-N and such. We'll we can put that on screen for you, for the audience, for their sake. Then there's the one of the, I don't know if he's a conductor. I think he's NJ. I can't remember his name.
How'd the brakeman do?
I think that brakeman dies too. The only one who survives out of the crew is the flagman, and his name is Barney Judge. And then finally, Oscar or O.J. Daniels, who is really touted as a hero, trying to rescue people out of the death car in terms of the steam that's in the car, and he gets scalded. And I believe he goes up to the game farm, which is, well, it's no longer in operation, but he tries to get to the game farm, and I don't know that he makes it. One report says he dies on Hazen Road and on the way back. He doesn't successfully get to where there's a phone. Barney Judge actually does call into the railroad, and then he puts out flares and such on both ends and of the wreck to prevent any additional wreck from happening. There's a story that goes with Hackettstown is about a little over 3 miles in that direction to the east.
Washington's about 5 that.
Correct. And the train's coming in this direction. The freight agent hears the engine blowing for this crossing. In other words, 2 long, 1 short, 1 long whistle. He hears that, okay, but he never hears it for the next grade crossing at Airport Road. At that point, he assumes correctly something has happened. He doesn't know what, of course, but what he does is there's a westbound freight which will be coming down this track, which no longer exists. He stops it at Hackettstown, preventing what would have been a catastrophe, because the cars, the locomotive, everything is over both tracks. So you can just imagine having a freight train come through, what that would have caused. So fortunately, that's of all the things that possibly could have gone wrong, that's the only thing that goes right. Everything else basically goes wrong that you could possibly think in terms of worst case scenarios.
Now what we have today, out through this area, you can see there's an obvious big trench here. Water is running off from the hillside over here. We can kind of see where it's coming down. But at the time of the accident, there was more drainage structure here than there is today. There was actually a double pipe right here with water that came out from an angle here and from over here, from under the road. There was more piping on the south side of the road over here that no longer exists at all. At the time that the railroad was double track here, and at the time this was not all just game farm, this was all a sort of cultivated field here. We can tell from Barry's photos that this was a somewhat recently planted crop. The crops in the images are only about yay high. Right now, what we see when we look at these fields, Chuck might want to put some imagery of that in there and maybe show some of Barry's. Those fields were kind of brown, and it was more like what you're seeing behind me over here. It looked very similar to that in these historic photos. So now where you have all this grass up the hill here, you have to imagine that's all brown dirt, and it's going to be running off as soon as you get the first heavy rain. So all of that debris would have come down here, could have clogged up the pipes, caused issues there. And this is coming off of the entire field. This is a higher elevation on the south side of the tracks at this point. So there was clearly some runoff issues that happened here. They knew there were runoff issues. They knew there were runoff issues, or they would not have had the kind of substantial drainage structures. I suspect that some of these structures might be here and buried more. If you look at the imagery, it looks like they're right next to the former westbound, but we don't see it here at all anymore. This has all been backfilled over it. So I do suspect that there might be some of that infrastructure still underneath, but it's not functioning in any way at all anymore. And now we don't see any 70-mile-an-hour trains coming through here, so you don't necessarily need it. So that's just another consideration. There's a lot of theories as to what all of the criteria were that led to this horrible accident, but that is one of them. There was a legitimate drainage issue that we have seen evidence of in at least photography. But the Morris Canal was also a transportation corridor that was here earlier, starting in the 1820s. It was abandoned in 1924, much dismantled by 1927. So the game farm, as we know it, the property includes a portion of the Morris Canal, but that would not have been a game farm yet because it was still an actively used canal. Although not much traffic, it was still an actively used canal up until 1 year before this accident happened. We know the farm was there, and at least some of the outbuildings were there. As you're looking over through there, the canal crossed an island of grass right over there, and it crossed Rockport Road right near the center of where you're pointing now. And then it's on a little bit of a hillside. It follows a little shelf up through the game farm up there and behind the red barn. This was, of course, we call it the Old Road. Some people use the term Old Road, and as many of you know, they use Old Road. They use Old Main when it refers to the Lackawanna. This was originally the Morris and Essex Railroad, and the Lackawanna initially used the Warren Railroad going right down through to Hampton, New Jersey, until they acquired this. And this was extended. By the 1850s, the Morris and Essex had reached Hackettstown. It was cut off at Hackettstown because they also wanted to build through the Delaware Water Gap to open up the anthracite industry. But when the Warren Railroad and John I. Blair came in first, that became the Lackawanna Main Line. They instead changed their plans, and they extended west to Phillipsburg. That was completed in 1866. By 1868, was it, the Lackawanna took control of it, and it was shifted where instead of going down to Hampton, this became the main line. So it was the old main line. It became double-tracked all the way through until, of course, the completion of the cutoff, which is 1911.
Right.
Then this became a secondary.
The front trucks of the 1104 derail right here, somewhere on the grade crossing, and are now bounding across the ties here. One set is over here, and the other set is on the other side of the rails, but where they're not supposed to be. By the way, this is known as the Rockport Sag. It's a straight track or tangent track for several miles going towards Hackettstown on a 1%, roughly 1% downgrade. So trains could really rip along here. As Mr. Nafee, A.J. Nafee said, 70 miles an hour is good for 70 miles an hour. So it's quite possible that the Rockport wreck occurs at 70 miles an hour. But the reason why the trains would like to pick up speed going down this hill was because there's another hill which is going uphill towards Netcong, and they wanted to get basically a run for the hill. So possibly, maybe it's 70 still or 60, but probably didn't lose a whole lot of speed yet. Now 200 feet is about 2/3 the length of a football field. Imagine a train coming through at 70 miles an hour. It's not going to stop very quickly of its own accord. And it's thought, at least according to Barney Judge, that the engineer did not apply the brakes. So it's quite possible that he may have already been incapacitated before he would have been able to apply the brakes. So the crossover, we're roughly at 198 feet from the grade crossing. The crossover comes here. There's actually, it would have come from track 2 or the westbound main, would have come through here and it's gone here. The left front wheel of the front trucks of the 1104 hits the crossover and flips the engine, and then all sorts of bad things happen after that. But a locomotive with all that momentum, the weight and the speed, will continue down for another 250 feet. Okay, so this is a real rough drawing of where the switch would have come in from the westbound track to the eastbound track. Because it's a trailing point switch, what they call, any train that want to go from this track to that track would actually literally have to go beyond the switch and then back up into it. What happens here is that the front truck of the locomotive 1104 will hit what they call a frog, which is part of the structure of the switch, and will be, because it's derailed from hitting debris at the grade crossing 198 feet to our west, come through here, and then that'll cause the locomotive, because there's a track here along this alignment. So this poorly drawn out crossover alignment I have here at least gives you a very rough idea of where where there would have been a track that basically the same size, roughly speaking, of the tracks that are here. I'm not they were 90 pound per yard back then. I don't know what the weight of this rail is, but it's close, I'll say. But the point being is that there's an actual track that's here, and that the train that's coming along, that's, you know, if it's on the rails, it's not an issue. If you're off the rails, it's a big issue, especially if you're going very fast. So it hits this, it will flip the 1104 on its side, and then will basically slide and ripping up the track as it goes along, as you can imagine, because the weight behind this and just the impact that it has on the physical roadbed. And then it's going to go another 250 feet, the front of it, The front of the 1104 ends right here. This is the wheels of the, well, actually over there to be exact, because at that point the locomotive is on its side in the ditch, and then cars start piling up on top of it because the momentum is carrying them forward. This is, I suspect, long before the days of tight lock couplers, which would prevent that, or at least, well, maybe would prevent that from occurring, which is where railroad accidents or derailments are most dangerous, when the cars come off the rails. Obviously, there was nothing you could do about the steam locomotive, but the fact that those cars come up and go on top of the locomotive, that's where the bad things happen, because of the steam being shot up into the cars above it. So in those days, we're basically in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night. It's dark. It might have been still raining on and off. There are reports of that at that point, although not heavily. But here we are, and this is a solemn place to be. Actually, since that is where the actual locomotive, the front of the locomotive was, we're somewhere near, maybe getting a little bit closer here to where the engineer and fireman might have been in the locomotive. But and then the cars are going to be over here someplace. So there's the deaths that are taking place, or will take place, and the injuries are taking place right in this area right here. I know in previous episodes I've talked about paranormal activity, and you would think that, well, if you believe in paranormal activity, which I do personally, you would think, okay, if there's a number of deaths, that you would expect to see paranormal activity here. I've heard stories, but not about here, but rather west of the actual grade crossing. I don't know what to make of that. I've just heard a couple of stories. I can't, of course, verify anything. I'm just going by what I've heard. So that may or may not be true. But here, this, you have to. The memorial is actually over by the grade crossing, but where the vast majority of deaths take place is right within this immediate vicinity here. So, and in many ways, this place hasn't, except for the fact that there's only one track here, it really hasn't changed all that much in many ways. So, some other interesting things that occur. Now we're talking about the freight traffic, which is the whole reason why basically this actually takes place. If that train goes over the cutoff, the New Jersey cutoff, doesn't happen. I mean, maybe another train which comes along, the next one along may wreck, but it wouldn't have been this train. Supposedly there was a couple of freight trains that are going eastbound on the cutoff, and they rerouted the train, and they knew this at midnight, well before this train was even anywhere near where the wreck would take place. But it's always been a question as to whether if that was really true or something that was told after the fact. Because they said, and then in the Interstate Commerce Commission report, they actually quote one of the officials saying, "Oh, this is a usual practice," or something along those lines. That it was not unusual for this kind of a train. I don't know how often this kind of train would be run. Leopold Newman actually did run this train several years before, so this wasn't the only time that this was actually run. I suspect that he didn't run any after this, but certainly before this he had run it for several years. I don't know if he came over the Lackawanna or what they were referring to, but whatever the case is, that's what the official report from the railroad was, that it was something that was not out of the ordinary.
And of course they wanted to eliminate as much liability as they could, which is why that's why they kept a full-time photographer like Mr. Barry on, for one. Wasn't there also some discrepancies in the story regarding speed based on an interview with an employee?
Yes, yes, there was. And the only employee of the railroad who survives the wreck is Barney Judge. Now, the railroad is going to go head over heels in trying to discredit him, because he says he says that they were doing 70 miles an hour. They talk him down to 50 miles an hour. We know that. We know that for a fact. That he originally said
Initially
70,
he said 70, yeah.
and then the officials get to him, and he said, "Oh, he really doesn't know what he's talking about." They didn't put it in so many words, but basically he said he's an inexperienced flagman. Quite frankly, I would think if you're a flagman and you've been on the job for about 2 days, you know what 70 miles an hour is.
Yeah.
So that's nonsense, you know.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, in the same report, A.J. Nafee, who was one of the big honchos, an engineering guy, he's quoted as saying, "Oh, this railroad is good for 70 miles an hour." I think he was covering the tracks, so to speak. That if in fact the report somehow came out that it was that the train was actually, we judged it that it was actually doing 70 miles an hour, that at least Nafee would be on the record saying, "Yeah, well, that track is good for 70 miles an hour."
Yes.
So there's some interesting things in terms of the liability. Now, there is the story about whether there was actually road work that was done either the same day or the day before on this hilly section that will wash out onto the tracks. But there's also photos that Mr. Barry takes, which I believe they were taken up here, where there's corn. There isn't this today.
There isn't, right. Up on this hillside, Mr. Barry's photos clearly show the crops that are very similar to the crops that are off in the field to the north of us, in that level of cultivation. So very brown, very susceptible to erosion when you do get heavy downpour. So that is also true. So there is evidence to suggest that it very well could have happened just in the way that it was described, based on an erosion issue and mud in the track and within the gauge. So,
yeah, and there's also photos, or a photo at least, of a house that is damaged, wind damage, which I understand from what you say it was not actually here, but it was somewhere a little bit would be east of here in the valley.
As we tend to do, we look at Mr. Barry's photos and we try to speculate where exactly they would be. We look at all these buildings. We were looking at the photos of, there's the house out here behind us. That house there has a concrete foundation, which they did have that in the early 1900s, but it doesn't seem to look like the house in some of the offset pictures Mr. Barry took facing to the north. But driving around on some of the streets close to here, there is one over on Rockport Road this way. And it does look, from a side profile, very similar to the one he photographed for some of his pictures. And he would do so because any damage to property that's within sight of this, certainly you can't see that now behind us. But back then you definitely would have, because there was far less trees in 1925 in the area. All of this was cultivated. So if that house got badly damaged, it's easy to say it's here. And we do have photos that show damages to that house and to some of the other structures on the property, and what appears to be a bridge or some other collapsed structure down along a small creek. And I think that might be this house that's just a little bit to the east of us on Rockport Road.
Okay, so I mean, they're trying to make a case that this was a severe storm. Now, of course, wind doesn't necessarily translate to rain, but there's no doubt they saw lightning in the distance when the train passed through Washington, New Jersey. So, but clearly, the talking about the lumber yard, that was started by a lightning strike in Hackettstown. So clearly, there's thunder, lightning, rain, and all that. So, but the thing is that the railroad, yes, has to be very concerned. 50
Certainly.
people died, 5 of which were the employees of the railroad, but still.
And nationwide news, world news.
Yes.
World news for
all
that matter.
over, front page, New
One
York
of
Times,
the worst train wrecks in human history.
And the worst, still to this day, is the worst. And to this day, the Rockport wreck is still the worst accident, or worst in terms of number of deaths, in Warren County history. And Warren County, New Jersey is about to celebrate its 200th anniversary coming up in just in a few weeks at the end of June 2025. So that it's something that obviously it was, in those days you can imagine the sensation it would cause. And the thing is that hundreds, if not thousands, of people descend on this area, and they talk about the state police arriving around 5:00 a.m. Of course, the train derailed about an hour and a half before that. It's just starting to get light. They're trying to get a handle on all the people are here, and basically the confusion of trying to get the injured out. Of course, there are people who have already died. It's just basically well, they're doing the best they can, of course, with the tools that they have. They actually took bedding and beds actually out of the Pullman cars and brought them out, and they were putting people on them and trying to treat them, at least make them comfortable until they could get them, to a hospital if they make it that far. They are they don't really have a whole lot of, I'll say, any kind of first aid type of equipment. So really they're at a big disadvantage. And quite frankly, a lot of these people, it wouldn't make any difference anyway, even today.
They couldn't even, from what we've read, they couldn't even pick some of these people up. There were reports of people that showed up and tried to pick up an injured person, and their skin just fell off. And it's really horrific stories of that. One of the people that responded to this tried to help a person and ended up just getting sick right on the site, I've read. He turned around and threw up because he couldn't handle the level of gore that this produced. And
much of the early rescuing is done in the dark. They don't have any lights. As it begins to get light, obviously that helps, at least to the extent that they're at least can see what they're doing.
You have to picture people with lanterns. That's all. Maybe they had a few lanterns to try to see what they're doing.
And the thing is, when we talk about safety and the standards of trains in particular, the cars, basically, the coaches collapse. Even though they're made out of steel, they collapse. One would think that today, at least, the integrity of the car bodies would have remained intact in such a similar accident. Granted, you wouldn't have a steam locomotive, but that is obviously a big problem. The steam locomotive. If you don't have a steam locomotive, you don't have much of the death that you have here. Granted, some of the people died. It wouldn't have made any difference. They're trained doing 70 miles an hour. It doesn't matter. They were killed because of
blunt force trauma.
Yeah, exactly. As opposed to the scalding, which is responsible for the vast majority of deaths, and which is, once again, a horrific way to go. Just because of what it does to you when you're exposed to superheated steam. Not even just steam, but superheated steam. This train doesn't go very far once it hits this grade crossing, and that's really part of or maybe a major part of the issue, is that it had this train, let's say this crossover, the switch wasn't there, this train probably just keeps bounding down the ties and
until
eventually
it comes to a stop, right?
And maybe nobody dies. It's quite possible.
Yeah.
But that crossover is what causes the whole thing, and that's really, if you can say there's really a cause to the accident, to the severity of the accident, that's it. That's really what causes it. Otherwise, it may be just a footnote, an asterisk, to history in a sense. Yeah. Before I forget, though, what's kind of interesting, I don't know what to make of this. It's maybe just a coincidence. President William Truesdale, who had been president of the Lackawanna since 1899, he was responsible for building the cutoff, a couple of cutoffs, one in Pennsylvania as well, one in New Jersey, upgrading the whole line.
Many small cutoffs, little cutoffs everywhere.
Yeah, right, but basically modernizing the railroad into what they called was the most. The most modern railroad in America, or something.
The best engineered railroad in the world, it had been called.
Something. There were different things that they were called, but most of that is attributable to William Truesdale. 14 days after this accident occurs, he resigns his position as president, but becomes chairman of the board of managers. Maybe a total coincidence, but I've always wondered. It's sort of just interesting. We don't have the correspondence. We have earlier correspondence going up to like 1915 or so with him, but there's nothing from 1925 to tell us why the timing of that. Granted, he wasn't he's up for retirement, but it's
How
curious.
old was he at that time?
Let me see. He dies when he's about 10 years later. So he's probably in his, I'm guessing, his mid-70s, early 70s. We can check that, but that's a guess at this point.
Yeah.
So he's not a young man. So it's maybe it was his time, but it's just an interesting thing that the timing. I don't know what to make of it. I'm not saying that he did it. He resigned or he was moved up because of this, but it's just
Yeah.
It's just interesting. Just one of those things you don't know if it's a coincidence or if there really was something behind it.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to thank Chuck for inviting me to be a part of this video. I love history and keeping all of these interesting tidbits, especially about Warren County, alive. I wear a couple different hats here. So I'm president of Metrotrails, New Jersey's nonprofit corporation. It's actually now a 501c3, Metrotrails. That's at metrotrails.org, facebook.com/Metrotrails, or if you want to do our weekly hikes, it's www.meetup.com/Metrotrails also. I'm also chairman of the Warren County Board of Recreation Commission, and we have a lot of great stuff going on. We have Parks Foundation. You're going to see a whole lot of these kiosks made just like this, which are done by a lot of really great people involved with the Parks Foundation for Warren County, and there's a lot of other great initiatives going on. So you're going to see all sorts of great little historic pieces, some of them associated with the Lackawanna Railroad. There's a very similar one to this at the concrete arch underpass along Route 57 in Washington that's been recently installed. So we're helping to keep the history alive through the Parks Foundation in Warren County, and it's great to have as much support as we have for that. There's also up here in this corner you'll see this little emblem here. That is the logo for the Route 57 Warren Heritage Byway, which is it's a scenic byway route, and so there are several different historic sites that are not right on Route 57, but we encourage people to go off of that designated route to visit all of these different important historic sites. This obviously is a very important one. So that's just a little bit more about what's going on in Warren County when it comes to history.
Now you run trail hikes from, is it weekly or
every Sunday typically? Occasionally it's different, but every Sunday we do 15 to 20 miles all over the tri-state area mostly. We've been New Jersey, PA, New York are the main ones, but we've been into Maryland, Delaware, West Virginia, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island a little bit, and we do 15 to 20 miles each time. And I've been running them now for 28 years.
So how many total? I know there's some astronomical number that you've done. Do you know?
Of the 15 plus mile hikes, I am at like 1,180 or so I've run.
Okay.
So yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and you're dressed down for this because you sometimes wear the tie and
I'll wear a tuxedo on a hike.
Okay.
But yeah, but no, this is like a blazer and everything. These are really kind of thin. I like going with just this type of thing, but it's these are only like $1 or $2 at a thrift store, and the material is really thin, so this is really breathable. I'm not overheating right now.
Okay.
So it kind of tells a couple of different stories. On one hand, I like looking at all of the historic pictures, just like we like to do, and you see these people in these old shots and in a full suit and tie out there in these natural settings, and it looks kind of ridiculous, the juxtaposition of that now, but I always liked that. But the fact of the matter is that just the khaki pants and these things is very breathable material. So it's actually a really great hiking attire. Not only that, if I wear this into the water, it's dry within an hour. So I'll go swimming in a suit and tie, and it's just not a problem. People don't realize that. And I pay $5 for a full suit at like church sales or family thrift. And so
And do people respect you more because you're dressed up, do you think? Or?
No, I think that they look at me as a joke in some cases, in other cases not. I mean, it depends. You have a lot of hiking groups will try to make hiking something that's exclusive. They'll say that you have to wear your Gore-Tex, you have to wear this really high-end expensive stuff to go out hiking. They're trying to take this thing that should be for everybody and make it exclusive. I'm totally against that. Everybody should be able to hike. That's why I don't charge for it. That's why I never will charge for it. I'll accept donations, but if you don't have $1 to speak of, you're not going to have to spend $1 to come out and do a long-distance hike with me. And the way I see it is that it's kind of a joke, it's a gimmick, it's fun, but at the same time, I can also say, you know what? I went out and spent $5 for everything I'm wearing. I look better than you do, and when it comes to dealing with people in the Gore-Tex and stuff, and I didn't have to spend a fortune. It's making a real statement that this is for everybody, and it doesn't really matter what walk of life you come from. You could be a millionaire and hike with me, or you could be a minimum wage seasonal person someplace. And if we appreciate walking, we're all on the same page. I'm doing high mileage. If you want to do high mileage, that brings everybody to this same level. There's no us and them. It's all about just appreciating what's out there, appreciating history and ecology, and somehow piecing it together. And in that way, it kind of weeds out some of the people that I think might be a problem. We get people that really genuinely appreciate something, and there's no hidden agenda or anything. Oh, the people that come out and want to do 15 miles, they want to do 15 miles. You know? So why don't we move over to the memorial, comment on it. I wanted to have you read it. It's not very long, but yeah, I'd be honored to read it.
Some comments that can be made about it.
Okay. Here, on June 16th, 1925, at 3:25 a.m., an eastbound train derailed and wrecked. The engine's boiler exploded, scalding many passengers. In spite of the valiant rescue efforts by townspeople and game farm employees, 50 died. It was the deadliest accident in Warren County history. Hackettstown Historical Society, marker by Cochran Funeral Home, 6/17/95.
So it's actually factually correct except for one thing, and that's the boiler. The boiler did not explode on the 1104.
It was compromised, we can say.
Right. But the 1104 would actually be put back into service, so they will repair it, and it will continue to run until 1930. And at that point, I'm not sure if it's what its disposition is, but it as far as the Lackawanna was concerned, that was the end of its life. But that's the only part of the plaque text that's actually not correct. But the thing is that was reported early on, like the New York Times, the first day after. Well, it wasn't the 16th, the 17th, because they didn't make the 16th. They actually do say that the boiler exploded, but we know that's not true.
I suppose the way they worded it, they can say, just like right now I have a pipe that exploded in my house, but it didn't explode, it's just, it's a matter of...
Right, but boilers or locomotive boilers have exploded.
Certainly.
And that is, but you would know by the looks of a locomotive that whether it had exploded or not. We can show you a photo from, actually, you probably...
There's a really good one on the Sussex branch that shows that...
Waterloo, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we're thinking of the same one. Classic, which shows you what happens or what a locomotive looks like where the boiler has exploded.
It's a really great little view of how exactly those machines worked, and we don't have a whole lot of examples of that with the things taken apart. So I always thought those pictures were particularly fascinating.
Yeah, so that's a really good one. So well, we've pretty much covered the gamut of this particular event, I guess you could say, this tragedy certainly. And I want to thank you and as
thank
well.
You. Yes. I appreciate you letting me come out and be a part of this.
It's been a pleasure, really.
Yeah.
And I want to get you for some others too. But
we'll do more.
Yeah.
All right.
But at least we'll take them one at a time. But I certainly want to appreciate what you do, and particularly, of course, for today, and our videographer. Mike Herman as well, certainly and all the stuff that he does for us. But I want to thank the audience for watching this, and so That's the end of part 43 on the Lackawanna Cutoff. Hope you look forward to part 44 on the Lackawanna Cutoff.